you've said that Marx's chief rival was Russian anarchist Mikhail Bakunin, who famously said in 1942, quote, "The passion for destruction is also a creative passion." So what kind of future did Bakunin envision?
Well, Bakunin, in some things, agreed with Marx, and in many others disagreed. He was an anarchist rather than hewing to the sort of scheme of history that Marx was proposing. So he did see humanity as fighting a struggle for a better way of life. He envisioned, as your quote suggests, that revolution and sheer confrontation and overthrow of the existing state of things, not compromise, was going to be the way to get there. But his vision was very different. Rather than organizing conspiratorial and hierarchical political movement, Bakunin envisioned that the ties would be far looser, that both the revolutionary movement and the future state of humanity would grow out of the free association, the anarchist thinking, the free association of individuals who rejected hierarchical thinking in their relations with one another, rejected the state as a form of organized violence, and rejected traditional religious ideas that he saw as buttressing hierarchies. So Bakunin is part of a broader movement of socialists and anarchists who are demanding change and envisioning really fundamental transformation. But his particular anarchist vision steers him into conflict with Marx. And he makes some prophetic remarks about the problems with the system that Marx is proposing. You should add to this that the very fact that Marx is a German by background and Bakunin is Russian kind of adds a further nationalist or element of ethnic difference there. Bakunin warned that a sort of creeping German authoritarianism might insinuate its way into a movement that hewed too closely to having hierarchies in the struggle to overthrow hierarchies. And, his anarchist convictions are not in question here. They led him into conflict with Marx, and Marx railed against him, denounced him, and eventually had him expelled from the International. One of the things, though, that also makes Bakunin so significant is Bakunin is the first in a longer series of approaches between anarchists and communists where they try to make common cause. And you have to say that in every case, it ends badly for the anarchists because the communist vision in particular, especially in its Leninist version, argued for discipline and a tightly organized professional revolutionary movement. The anarchists who sought to make common cause with communists, whether it was in the days of the Russian Revolution or the Russian Civil War, or whether it was then in the Spanish Civil War, the anarchists found themselves targeted by the communists precisely because of their skepticism about what turned out to be an absolutely key element in the Leninist prescription for a successful revolution.
If we can take that tangent a little bit, so I guess anarchists were less organized.
Yes, by definition.
Yeah. Why do you think anarchism hasn't been rigorously tried in the way that communism was? If we just take a complete sort of tangent, I mean, in one sense, we are living in an anarchy today because the nations are in an anarchic state with each other. But why do you think sort of there's not been an anarchist revolution?
Well, I think that probably some anarchists would beg to differ, right? They would see communes in Spain during the Spanish Civil War as an example of trying to put anarchist ideas into place. Bakunin, flitted from one area of unrest to another, hoping to be in on finally the founding of the sort of free communes that he had in mind. Another key point in all of this is that anarchy means something different to different people as a term. And so when you point out quite correctly that, we have an anarchic international situation, that's kind of the Hobbesian model of the war of all against all, where man is a wolf to man. Generally, except if you're talking about nihilists in the Russian revolutionary tradition, anarchists see anarchy as a blessed state, and one where finally people will be freed from the distorting influence of hierarchies, traditional beliefs, subjugation, inequalities. So for them, anarchy, growing out of the liberation of the human being, is seen as a positive good and peaceful. Now, that's at odds with the prescription of someone like Bakunin for how to get there. He sees overthrow as being necessary on the route to that. But as we point out, it's absolutely key to this entire dynamic that to be an anarchist means that your efforts are not going to be organized the way a disciplined and tightly organized revolutionary movement would be.
Yeah, it's an interesting stretch that a violent revolution will take us to a place of no violence or very little violence. It's a leap.
It's a leap, and it points to a phenomenon that would have enraged Marx and would have been deeply alienating to others in the tradition who followed him, but that so many scholars have commented on, and that's that there is a religious element, not a avowed one, but a kind of hidden religious or secular religious element to Marx's vision, to the tradition that follows Marx. And just think of the correspondences, right? Marx himself as kind of positioning himself as a savior figure, whether that's a Prometheus or a Moses who will lead people to the promised land. The apocalypse or the end times is this final revolution that will usher in a blessed final state, a utopia, which is equivalent to a secular version of heaven. There's the working class playing the role of humanity in its struggle to be redeemed. And scholar after scholar has pointed this out. Reinhold Niebuhr, back in the 1930s, had an article in the Atlantic magazine that talked about the Soviet Union's communism as a religion. Erich Voegelin, a German-American scholar who fled the Nazis and relocated to Louisiana State University and wrote tomes about the new phenomenon of political religions in the modern period. And he saw fascism and Nazism and and Soviet communism as bearing the stamp of political religions, meaning ideologies that promised what an earlier age would have understood in religious terms. Voegelin called this the eschaton and said that these end times, the eschaton was being promised in the here and now, being made imminent. And he warned against that, saying the results are likely to be disastrous.
So that's actually a disagreement with this idea that, people sometimes say that the Soviet Union is an example of an atheistic society. So when you have atheism as the primary thing that underpins the society, this is what you get. So that's what you're saying is a kind of rejection of that, saying that there's a strong religious component to a communism.
A hidden component, one that's not officially recognized. I mean, I think that, I had a chance to witness this, actually. When I was a child, my family... I grew up in Chicago to a Lithuanian-American family, and my father, who was a mathematician, got a very rare invitation to travel to Soviet Lithuania, to the University of Vilnius, to meet with colleagues. And at this point, journeys of more than a few days or a week were very rare to the Soviet Union for Americans. And the result was that I had unforgettable experiences visiting the Soviet Union in Brezhnev's day. And among the things I saw there was a museum of atheism that had been established in a church that had been ripped apart from inside and was meant to kind of embody the official stance of atheism. And I remember being baffled by the museum on the inside, because you would expect exhibits, you would expect something dramatic, something that will be compelling, and instead there was some folk art from the countryside showing bygone beliefs. There were some lithographs or engravings of the Spanish Inquisition and its horrors, and that was pretty much it. But as a child, I remember being reproved in that museum for not wearing my windbreaker, but instead carrying it on my arm, which was a very disrespectful thing to do in an official museum of atheism. When I was able to visit the Soviet Union later for a language course in the summer of 1989, one of the obligatory tours that we took was to file reverently past the body of Lenin outside the Kremlin in the mausoleum at Red Square. And communist mummies like those of Lenin, earlier Stalin had been there as well, communist mummies like Mao or Ho Chi Minh, really, I think, speak to a blending of earlier religious sensibility, reverence for relics of great figures, almost saintly figures, so that even what got proclaimed as atheism turned out to be a very demanding faith as well. And I think that's a contradiction that that other scholars have pointed out as well.
Yeah, it's a very complicated sort of discussion. When you remove religion as a big component of a society, whether something like a framing of political ideologies in religious ways is the natural consequence of that.
We hear nature abhorring a vacuum, and I think that there are places in human character that long for transcendental explanations, right? That it's not all meaningless. In fact, there's a larger purpose, and I think it's not a coincidence that such a significant part of resistance to communist regimes has in part come from, on the one hand, religious believers, and on the other hand, from disillusioned true believers in communism who find themselves undergoing an internal experience of revulsion, finding that their ideals have not been followed through on.